So for some time, I thought in some way or another that maybe it would be best to have a church practice weekly communion. And there are some biblical reasons why I thought this might be the case. The scripture never prescribes how often you should partake of communion, and so it was never a hard line for me. But I did think that maybe that was the best option. And then I noticed something that caused me to rethink that a little bit. Not necessarily change my mind on that, but at least make me rethink why I was feeling that or why I was thinking that, and if it actually was because of my scriptural convictions or if it was something else going on. And what I noticed is that almost every other, especially younger pastor that I know, but just across the board too, most pastors that I know were thinking that they should move toward weekly communion, and still are. That still seems to be a common thread. And it's not just my Reformed friends. It's also my evangelical friends, and it's also Lutherans, and it's everyone that I know. It seems that there is this impulse right now to move toward weekly communion. And everything I'm about to say is not to say that that is not a good thing to move toward. It might be. However, seeing that this wasn't like confined to one theological tradition or one denomination, it just made me question what's going on. It made me think maybe this is more of a cultural trend. And this is possibly just because this is what I've been preaching recently, and it's just made me think of it. But recently, we've been talking at Christ Covenant about the temple and the ark. We preach through Isaiah, and there are places in Isaiah where Isaiah calls out the people, or the Lord calls out the people for placing their trust in the temple instead of in Him, thinking that this physical temple in some way is going to force God to be with us and save us from the Babylonians. We have the temple of the Lord, and there's nothing anyone else can do to us then, because God is contained and controlled by this physical place. And the same thing was true of the ark. We've been walking through 1 Samuel as our Old Testament scripture readings each Sunday. And we've just been through the point where the Israelites use the ark and go into battle against the Philistines, and the Philistines capture the ark. And God said that this was going to happen, but the people weren't listening to God. They saw the ark as this superstitious item where God was controlled and contained, and if they took it into battle with them, He was forced to give them victory. But God isn't contained within the ark. He wasn't contained within the temple. This is not something that anybody reading the scripture would come up with, right? This is not something that anybody listening to what God said would actually think. But notice that in 1 Samuel or in the time of Isaiah, you're talking about times when there is significant fracture within the people of God, and there is extreme, I don't know if you say difficulty, there is some kind of very difficult situation where the society itself, the culture itself, is beginning to fracture and fall apart. And what do these people do? What do the people of God do at those times? Well, they latch onto some kind of physical object in which they can put their trust and hope that God is like in some way going to be controlled by the fact that he's in the ark or he's in the temple. It's giving them something solid that they can try to latch onto when everything else is seeming to give way around them. So everything is shaking, and it seems like there's this one thing that I can hold on to. And I don't know that this is the case, but I was speaking with my father the other day, and it made me think, I was speaking about this, and it made me think that this is maybe why there is an impulse right now to move toward weekly communion. And I'm not saying that that would be wrong per se. I do think that we want to check the reasoning, what's driving us toward doing these things. If your church does not practice weekly communion, but does partake of the Lord's Supper often already, regularly, it's not something that you want to just jump right into. It's not something that you don't want to be a revolutionary. You want to take your time, figure out why were we doing it this often in the first place? Was there a reason behind it? You don't want to just jump in and change everything right away. You might need to change something, but you don't want to do it in a revolutionary fashion. But is this why maybe we are in a culture that is falling apart, ripping apart at the seams? There is extreme division among us. There is no one collective, cohesive worldview that kind of holds us together, that allows us to think the same or really even speak the same language in some way. It's hard for us to communicate and talk with each other. That is a sign that everything is starting to crumble and fall apart. I wonder if the impulse to move toward weekly communion is in part, and this might not be conscious, but if it is in part something that is, we're trying to latch on to something that will hold in the midst of the fracture. We're looking for an ark. We're temple, because it seems like God has given up the situation. He has given us over to what is happening. So we need something that will protect us, will save us. And in some sense, I think that there's a noble impulse to then want to partake of the Lord's Supper regularly, more regularly, right? Weekly, all the time. I think that there is a good impulse there, but I think it could be tinged with that same kind of superstition. God is contained within these things, and by partaking of them more often, He's forced to bless us. He's forced to strengthen us. He's forced to save us from the social chaos and fracture that is quickly destroying so much around us. But that's not true. So basically, my desire in even bringing this up or thinking about this is that we do things for the right reasons, and that ultimately that we come to the supper in faith and not in superstition. We come to the supper knowing that God has promised to strengthen us and work in us and meet with us in the supper, but only as we come to it in faith. If we are coming to the supper thinking this is some magical talisman, this is some kind of special physical object that is going to give me a spiritual blessing, spiritual power, and it has to be efficacious because of this superstitious belief that I have about it. If we're coming to it like the Israelites thought of the ark at times, or like the people of Israel thought of the temple, right? Nothing can happen to us. We have the temple. Then that's really not how we want to be thinking about it. That's not how we want to be partaking of the Lord's Supper. That is not coming in a worthy fashion to the table of the Lord. Hey everyone, thanks for listening today. If you have any questions, concerns, ideas, problems, anything with what I just said, feel free to reach out to me. My email is pastormichaeljbowman@gmail.com. You can find more information about Christ Covenant Church, where I pastor, at ccc-pca.org. And if you're in the La Crosse area, I would love to get together and talk more in person. All right, bye.